Welcome to the exploration of consciousness.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the exploration of consciousness. I'm your host, Matt Presti. It's good to be back with you all, and I'm very happy and excited to introduce a panel discussion, a conscious panel discussion. This was a discussion I would have loved to have had at CauseFest had I met these guys prior, but basically the three folks that I'm bringing on have been on a previous podcast. I'm going to go ahead and share screen just so you guys can see. This is, you should be seeing the CauseFest. Is everyone seeing that?
Yep.
This was a event that took place in Nashville, and it was really cool to meet the three guys that were on my show recently as well. Mr. Mark Gober, Mr. Paul Conant, and Mr. John Klyczek. And our moderator today is a gentleman who I've appeared on his podcast called Feel the Link, which is on YouTube and Rumble. And Luke Renda and I did a 5-part series of interviews that you can check out on that channel as well. But again, this is something that I wanted to do. I'm happy to say, too, that Courtney Turner has been instrumental in the booking and the running and the putting on of the CauseFest event. And she just did her 300th podcast with Edward G. Griffin. So, guys, check her work out, Courtney Turner. And you can also go to rebelsforcause.com, and that will be the link where you can check out the work that she's doing and the upcoming Florida next stop. Are any of you gentlemen going to be speaking at the Florida event?
Fortunately, no, not this time.
No, I told her to keep me in mind, but I actually got to go to Poland in September, and it's going to be a mad dash to get that together. So can't squeeze another one in.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I won't be there either.
Very good. All right. Well, Luke, if you want to just give a brief introduction of yourself, and then we can do an introduction of each of the speakers, let them do a quick introduction. We can get this show on the road.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'm just do interviews. I interviewed Matt last year. We ended up hitting it off and doing a 5-part series together, and I'm just really happy to be here. I'm glad he asked me to come and get back in the saddle here with him and start making content again. And I really enjoyed your interviews. It's great to meet you guys. John, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, so name's John Klyczek. I am the author of this book right here. That's School World Order, the Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education. I've been teaching at the college level, rhetoric and research argumentation, and now interdisciplinary studies as well for well over 10 years. And you can find all my stuff at schoolworldorder.info. I'm also a relatively frequent contributor to Whitney Webb's Unlimited Hangout.
How about you, Paul? You want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. My name is Paul William Conant. I'm a trained hypnotist, and I got into hypnosis not really to learn how to hypnotize people, but how to learn self-defense against it. Hypnosis kind of runs the world, among other potentially nefarious influences, but not for long. Not if more people understand that there is a syntax, if you will, that is germane to the way the mind works, that they hijack, they hack into it, but awareness is the key to not letting that happen. So that's what I'm about. That's me right there.
Okay, how about you, Mark? My name's Mark Gober. I come from a very mainstream background, went to Princeton for undergrad, worked in investment banking in New York, worked in Silicon Valley advising technology-focused companies, and had a
major transformation starting in 2016 that's led me to explore the nature of reality and the world that we live in. So I've now written 5 books. They're all about an end to upside down something. And also have a podcast series called Where Is My Mind?
Awesome. Right on. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself or everyone knows you?
I'm pretty sure everyone knows my mug. So I just want to say thanks to everybody for coming on. And real quick, I do want to share screen one more time. I'm not going to get caught in that loop of the Zoom prison here, but you guys can see this. Episode 6 was with William Conant, called Dehypnotizing Your Mind. TEC 7, episode 7, School World Order with John J. Klyczek, and episode 8, Turning Consciousness Right Side Up with Mark Gober. Each pushing over close to 1,000 or over, and just check these guys out. They do great work. Both Mark and John basically came out of academia, which I wanted to share that because they kind of have done what Michael Sirian says a very rare few do, which is challenge academia itself with their work. And so hats off to you guys for that. It's an inspiring thing when people turn the spotlight around and actually call out some of the things that they find through their own investigation. Because that's what school is supposed to be, isn't it? It's supposed to teach you the critical thought and skills, not just repeating and remembering. And so when you guys do that, when people in academia challenge it from an academic standpoint, that's where we get the upward momentum. It's where we get the reformation, if you will, because sometimes calling things laws, as in science, as in my work is shown, is premature, and we have to have the ability to change and upgrade as the universe does if we're really going to truly find solutions and upgrade our sciences and our approaches to thinking and thought itself and consciousness. So again, thank you guys. And to you, Luke, if you're ready to start, just don't forget your timer. We're going to do 3 minutes per answer. And we're going to blast through some questions, and hopefully you guys will get some good solution-oriented perspectives on this conversation in this panel.
Awesome. Here we go. Maybe we'll start with Mark with this one. What is a human being?
I'm going to give a 2-part answer. I'm going to start with the way I would have looked at it prior to my awakening of sorts, and now how I look at it today, because I think both are valid, but they need to be put together. My prior view would have been a strictly biological answer. And we can look at traditional fields within academia of all of the miniature components that make up this physical form that we are. And that perspective would also say that the human being is a conscious being, meaning it has the capacity for experience. And that's solely due to the biological processes in the body, specifically the brain. So we have a brain that allows us to be conscious, that allows us to even ask this question and have this panel, because without a consciousness, you wouldn't even be able to think about this stuff. Now I look at it a little bit differently, or very differently, which is that, yes, the body is biological, but it is not the producer of its consciousness. Rather, the body is a vessel. It is more like an apparatus that allows consciousness to have experience. So the human is one type of biological entity that has the capacity for embodying consciousness, but there are many other biological entities in the world that can also harbor consciousness.
Great. How about you, Paul?
Yeah, I'll expand a little bit on that. There's the biological component, right? In the 3D physical world, which is, you've got 30 trillion cells, each one of which is semi-autonomous, making, I'm not really sure the number here, but a certain number of electrochemical decisions per minute. You multiply that by 30 trillion. What you have is an incredible work, a symphony, a collaboration, if you will. You are animated by a living intelligence that is capable of taking 30 trillion autonomous beings and having them work together to form one being, which is you. So that's and that's not even getting into a sort of spiritual side to things, which, as an aside, I do fundamentally agree with Matt Presti's perspective on the existence of umpteen different dimensions. Reality really is here, and the spiritual is very real. It's not this thing that exists in some other realm that's not connected to ours. It's interpenetrating everything, in fact. So we separate physical and spiritual for ease of metaphor, for ease of comprehension. But essentially, the way I see it, a human being has the physical component, and it also has the how do we put this, the mind of God component. A human being is a microcosm of the whole universe, as is all other things within this universe, because they all emanate from the one mind of God. There isn't a bazillion competing gods out there. There is one universe, one God. You are invariably connected to that God. You come from it. And because of this fact, it is feasible that God knowledge can actually make its way into your consciousness. A lot of geniuses of history have said things along those lines, where they speak with God, they receive the knowledge of those that came before them, as though plucking it directly from the universe. And so I think human being is a lot of things. We're a physical being. We also have a microcosm of God aspects to ourselves, and we're also an unfinished product in a sense too. We are constantly making ourselves. So the definition of humanity, it could expand as we discover more of what we really are. So that'll be my answer for that one.
Awesome. How about you, John?
I'll try to hazard a synthesis of both Mark's and Paul's response. So I'm going to agree that human beings, there is a sort of a biochemical material component to our existence. But I believe that those are more just mechanisms that's of the greater spiritual consciousness that is the essence of the human being. And so to sort of bridge this understanding of us as a biochemical entity with the spiritual consciousness component, I actually kind of like Aristotle's breakdown of the human soul as, right, he's the three parts which correspond to rhetoric, logos, ethos, pathos. So a thinking part of the creature, a feeling part of the creature, and then basically a character or a will, which synthesizes the dialectic between the mind and the feeling. So the pathos, or the emotional component, we can get a window into that through understanding the biochemical and psychological mechanisms at a material sort of or at the level of the flesh, so to speak. But the spiritual component really has to do with the logos part, the thinking part, and that is to align the thinking part of the mind with the big L logos of the universe, which means that it is to ascertain and participate in the transcendent order of the universe. And then the willpower, which we could see as basically an extension of faith or belief, is the thing that basically enables us to use the mind, the small L logos, to participate in the big L logos, and to, rather than to be dragged along by the emotional capacities of our biochemistry. And so I would say we're fundamentally a spiritual creature made in the image of God with the designed purpose to participate in the conscious order of God.
And you, Matt?
Well, those are all excellent answers, guys. A human being, I have a quote on the front of my website: man is mind, matter is what mind does. So it's human being to me. You've heard it probably mentioned that the DNA spirals in our body vibrate at 570 trillion times a second. How they came up with that number, I don't know, but that's almost unfathomable. But really, it's, what do I see a human being as is a vessel for consciousness. I've heard it put this way too. It's a spacesuit, an organic spacesuit, so that your consciousness can drive around in this experience and get the experience itself for the growth of the soul, which is basically a record of all your past lifetimes. My research has been into reincarnation, near-death experience, consciousness itself, illumination. And it's interesting that most illuminates will say that consciousness is all there is, and that bodies are basically simulations, but not borrowing from simulation theory, rather that it's a simulation of the mind which centers all the processes of the bodies, each individual cell and every strand of DNA. So that body itself is an effect of the mind, of which is its cause, which is the root elements of idealism, especially German idealism. So it's just a very interesting culmination of mind, of consciousness, and of experience. And the human being can go through life and have these incredible experiences and even choose not to know the mind behind which is doing the experiencing, which leads to that study of, do we want to take it from just the study of anatomy to include the mind, which is psychology, and psychology being a very new study of its own, is something that I can well see would do good for humanity to incorporate that into its study of anatomy also, because the body and the mind together produce, again, the whole of the human experience. And we should not leave psychology at the door, or consciousness, and that's something I think that we're really starting to just discover as humans, that the mind, being psychology, is the study of ology and psyche, the mind and soul. So incorporating that into, the academic model would be very fortunate for all of us if that were to take place.
Awesome. Okay, what is consciousness? John, you want to start?
Sure. So maybe describe this in layers. So fundamentally, we could just boil consciousness down to the ability of pattern recognition to identify and respond to patterns in the external material world, and also the patterns introspectively within our own minds. And we could explain this through a number of different epistemologies. We could explain it in terms of classical conditioning, the stimulus response method of psychological behaviorism. We could extrapolate on that in terms of biochemistry, right? We could break it down in terms of how the neurotransmitters work in the brain and throughout the nervous system. We could even get extend that with an analysis of it as basically an evolutionary survival mechanism, where we could boil down the neurochemical responses to stimulus in the environment is basically a basic function of aversion and attraction that enables us to survive and pass on the genes. But I think these are basically only describing certain mechanisms or certain processes that are a component of consciousness, but not the essence of consciousness. For instance, in between the environmental stimulus and the behavioral response, we have the opportunity through introspection, through logic, through skepticism, to not basically just have reflexes to the external environment. And it's in this space of introspection where we can actually have agency over how we choose to interact with or respond to all these other mechanisms that I just laid out. And within that process of how we decide, that agency is perceiving an order to the universe. It's not just sort of a pragmatic phenomenology where the utility of a pattern is basically proof of its truth. Rather, pattern recognition is not by itself its own metaphysic or ontology, so to speak, right? So basically, the ability to intervene or intercede in those biochemical and psychological and evolutionary processes, with the higher mind is us basically harmonizing with the big L logos metaphysics of the universe. So again, I think that from here, we would really need to hazard ultimately a theological explanation, because then we also have the instance of, right, we have the opportunity through the conscious mind and the will to have some agency in that process, but there's also the ought component. So why ought I not just let myself be dragged along by my passions, so to speak? And so then on top of this metaphysical theological ontology, there's sort of an axiology that's built into it, which basically indicates that, right, this participation in the logos of the universe is also the participation in the design and the purpose of God's law. So ultimately, I think consciousness in its essence is not the particular mechanisms or epistemologies we can use to explain phenomena, but it has to do with the core essence of the part of the inner monologue that we call the self, that's able to make independent or transcendent decisions that transcend those mechanisms in alignment with the mind of God and the order of the universe.
Matt, you want to take this one?
Sure. Again, I come from the school of illumination, if you will. My study on, for instance, cosmic consciousness, Dr. Richard Morris Buck, he lays out some of the 40 greatest examples of what he terms to be illuminates, which is a great study, which was released in 1901. You have other authors around that time as well who did similar work and basically referenced his work. And he would include passages of basically what he termed illuminating writings, which prove this sort of connection to the greater consciousness, which Walter Russell would call God, mind, and consciousness synonymous. So it's not really theological in this approach. It's more experiential. You could say it's subjective, but you could also say that what is truly objective, if it takes a mind to, look at this objective reality, it's always subjective then. Because if the mind isn't doing the viewing, then what is viewing objectivity? It's got to be subjective in that sense. So I came up with the term non-jective, which is the middle ground between subjective and objective, which is that third strand, if you will, that missing strand that we often look at emotion universe and realize it's dualism, but we don't see the triality within that, which is the mind of the observer, you could say. And there's a point where I think it was Kant said, you can't step outside of your mind to view your mind, that the mind is what does the viewing. So from a Russell perspective, the mind would be a causal factor. Consciousness, God is cause, the single and the one. Let thine eye be single. So relatively, again, to compare it to the ocean, we're all drops of water in that greater ocean of consciousness. And to the degree that we realize that is to the degree we can utilize that power source in our own work, in our own efforts, in our own art and application to life. So consciousness is, again, a causal factor, from my opinion. It explains the motion universe in a way that materialist science just can't. There's too many question marks in materialist science. And I think the dark matter and the God particle they're actually looking for is the dark matter itself is that field of consciousness that all things move within. And that's the potentiality that can create, make, or break bodies in motion.
Paul?
I would say that consciousness, as I've come to understand things and learn things throughout 10 years of study at this point, I would go so far as to ascribe or to define consciousness as the monic substrate of all existence. What I mean by that is Walter Russell, as well as Chris Langan, and I hope I'm getting this right. I could, don't quote me on this, but I think that Leibniz's monadic plenum fits the bill for this kind of thing as well, where essentially mind is at cause for everything. There is actually no such thing as a thing or event in existence that doesn't have a syntactical kind of, in the broadest sense that you can think of it, a linguistic component, a descriptive component. Info and cognition are kind of like two sides of the same coin. But essentially, I regard consciousness as a ontologically real thinking substance. And I want to be a bit careful when I say substance, because what I'm talking about really is it's very close to the ether. It's very close to the way the monadology of Leibniz describes it. And again, I'm actually a bit new to Leibniz's work, so don't quote me on this, but the way I understand it is that you have a universe that is the mind of God, but then you also have little individual minds, a sort of background of infinite minds, like a whole background of all physical reality that quite literally is just a grid of minds, each one of which contains within itself the infinite, so to speak, the energy of the universe. All possible mathematics are contained within every single mind, but every single mind is striving to realize itself. Every single mind is dimensionless, in a manner of speaking, not literally not existing within a dimension of any kind, but dimensionless in the sense of it is in the background, and from that thinking substance can project ideas, thoughts, and in the process seem to affect reality at a distance. In Chris Langan's cognitive theoretic model of existence, he actually defines there being kind of two kinds of space in a sense. There's physical space, there's thinking space, and I'm again, I hope I'm not butchering his work either, but that's kind of how I see it. There's a physical proximity, therefore, but there's also something called descriptive proximity. And this explains why you can have things like symbolic rituals that affect things at a distance. It's why you can have a lot of people, a tremendous number of people describe experiencing tons of synchronicities, signs, things that are way beyond the scope of coincidence happens to them as they start tapping into spirituality, knowledge of God, this sort of thing. And I think that is probably inevitable, because if this thinking substance exists the way I believe it does, then it would actually be fundamentally impossible to have any thought whatsoever that does not imprint itself back on that thinking substance to then become redistributed as content throughout the rest of the universe. So that's what I think of consciousness.
And Mark?
The exercise of trying to define consciousness, in a sense, is actually distorting what it is. But given that we are human beings who communicate with words, we're going to have to distort what I would consider to be the limitless, infinite nature of consciousness. So everything that we're describing here is an approximation. So I want to give that preface. I think about consciousness as the part of us that has a capacity for experience. So that means that everything that we experience in the world, including thoughts, are within consciousness. The philosopher Rupert Spira would call all of those things modulations of consciousness. So consciousness, in this view, is the substrate of all reality. And I like an analogy from the philosopher Dr. Bernardo Kastrup. He says that we are like whirlpools within an infinite stream of consciousness. So each of us has an individual aspect of the broader consciousness, but that's enables us to be apparently separate. So we're both, we have an individuated consciousness that's part of a bigger consciousness. And to Matt's point about the notion of causality, causality is a tricky concept with consciousness, because I regard it as something that's beyond all space and time. And if you don't have time, then linear causality in the way that we typically think about it, that something from the past caused something in the future. That's kind of an oversimplification of the way that things ultimately work. So to me, consciousness is everything, and everything that we experience in the world is just a modulation of that universal consciousness.
What personal philosophical changes have you undergone since your departure from mainstream academic thought? John, you want to take this one?
Okay. I don't know that I've necessarily had any like revolutionary or radical changes, just maybe a refinement of some of the stuff that is not really accepted in academia. So I remember early on, one of the first times I wrote a paper in undergrad, and I forget what it was about, but I used the word truth with a capital T. And I was told, don't do that in academia, right? You're alluding to that there is one truth, or there is some sort of metaphysical, transcendent, basically a theological truth, which I suppose was sort of baked into it. But so it's a secular institution, so it's like, okay, I got to reframe how my discourse here to fit academia. But then as I wrote the end of my book, and sort of I studied what were the problems with education, or was prompted to hazard some solutions. There were two threads in the modern ed tech system that I thought were the main crux of what needed to be remedied, and that was sort of a rabid empiricism and a rabid skepticism. And the rabid empiricism, basically, you could boil down to all the ed tech stuff in terms of reducing human beings to biometric algorithms, and by extension, moving towards re-engineering the human being as basically a biochemical machine. And then on the flip side of that, which actually fuels that, is this whole the emergence of critical theory identity politics, in which everything is subjective, in which how you identify yourself is the metaphysic of your identity. That your identity, there is no biological component to it, there is no metaphysical component to it. It's just how you identify and how you express that identity. Well, in both of these, what they're missing is a cosmic or a transcendent metaphysics. And so in the process of writing those solutions, I really got back into my Christian roots, and started to read the church fathers, and looking at just the history of the church, and the history of some of the early heresies and things like that. And in particular, dived into classical logos theology as sort of a launch pad for what I tried to explain in a purely philosophical sense in the book. So I guess you could say that since then, I've not only spent more time studying logos theology in the early church fathers, and but not just as an intellectual pursuit, but the reality of that metaphysic has really sort of made itself clear in the presence of this emerging system that is entirely antithetical to it. So I suppose that's the change that I've undergone philosophically. But I would say it's more of a refinement or a renaissance of something that I maybe put to the side for the sake of being an academic.
Great. How about you, Mark?
Well, my philosophical shifts actually track with my books. My pattern has been that I have a paradigm shift, and then I decide I want to share it with people. So I'll just go through those pretty quickly. My first paradigm shift was around the connection between consciousness and the brain. I used to believe that consciousness is a byproduct of chemical and electrical activity in the brain, and that when you die as a body, that's the end of consciousness. And now I think that's incorrect, that consciousness transcends the body. And that means that things like psychic phenomena, or the quote unquote paranormal, which I don't love that term, because paranormal assumes that we know what normal is. But in any event, phenomena like that are not only possible, but they are expected under a model of consciousness that transcends the body, including phenomena like reincarnation. That was my first big shift. But along with that is a way of living life and thinking about purpose. I used to believe life was fundamentally meaningless and random. And what I mean by that is that the notion of meaning is something that we can make up on our own and rationalize. That's what I used to believe, but there was no meaning built into the fabric of reality itself. And now I think it's the reverse. I think that life is fundamentally meaningful and that each of us as a human being has something or things that we're here to do. As I applied that way of thinking metaphysically to the way the world operates, I started to recognize how much systemic corruption exists and engineering of thought that I had seen in other parts of my life, but I didn't fully appreciate it until I started to dive in. And that made me rethink the nature of politics and the nature of economics. Should we have a ruling class effectively, which is our status quo? And I began to question that. And along with all of this, I started to question what's the true history of this planet. Are there other intelligences? So if we are like whirlpools within a stream of consciousness, and we might think of that stream of consciousness as being multidimensional, then it would certainly seem possible that there might be other types of intelligences that we don't ordinarily perceive with our eyes. And certainly traditions all over the world, spiritual and religious traditions, have spoken about other types of non-human intelligence. So I became very much open to the idea that we're not alone. And I'll close by saying that I previously did not appreciate evil as a real entity. I would have said that, yeah, people can engage in evil activities, but now I think of it as something that is also built into the fabric of reality. That's sort of the obstruction of love, in a sense. And that is a real force that is adversarial, that is acting on the planet. And I now think that we are in some kind of a spiritual war that is inciting and enabling our collective evolution.
Matt?
Well, for me, I didn't actually go to college, but ended up as president of a university. Go figure that. What for me was a big step out of, I did used to have a mainstream academic thought when it came to quantum physics. I wasn't much interested in college after high school. Being a musician and such, I was more interested in pursuing the art for the sake of that pursuit. But I did eventually get into ancient history, things of that nature. Definitely comparative religious studies, but also quantum physics. What the bleep do we know? There's a period where I went through a new age phase, you could say, to the channeling, to the other stuff, just studying it, taking a look at all of it. And a lot of it was woo-woo and still is to this day. But one of the things that interested me more than anything else was the idea of free energy. So that's kind of what got me into the work of Walter Russell. And when Nikola Tesla had said he should lock his Universal One book up for 1,000 years, that really sparked my curiosity. So when I began to study Walter's work, what it alluded to was that basically academic mainstream science is way off the base. And then that got me into the philosophy of materialism versus metaphysics, and you could say there's a whole host of different philosophies one can study, but spirituality is in a sense a philosophy as well. It's a way of thinking that you can certainly study and integrate into your life. But the big thing for me was coming out of the idea that materialist science was the holy grail of physics. And just when you get to study all this stuff, you find out there's guys who have devoted their entire careers to debunking black holes. There's people who have thoroughly and totally debunked redshift. People who have completely and totally debunked this idea of nuclear particles, the Dewey B. Larsons of the world and such. And these are academics. So to me, it was just a real refresher to see that, I'm not just an outsider that disagrees with the power structure. you know, that there's other guys who were insiders that came, you know, to the outside and then shine the light back on that which they came out of, calling out its errors. So to me, it's coming out of the mainstream academic thought was rather an easy thing because I wasn't in it so long that it became a dogmatic point of view to the world. But again, why I appreciate like the guys coming on today and sharing their views with the same kind of an experience, only from more of an inner level.
How about you, Paul?
Let's see. So there are too many shifts to name, but I'll put it to y'all this way. So I started off hyper progressive politically, materialist, atheist, Democrat, you know, card carrying believer in identity politics, you name it. I was in that camp hardcore at one point. And honestly, the thing that got me to change, the thing that caused me to drift away from that, it was just being in a tremendous amount of mental pain, because you're cut off from the source, really, when that is your worldview. And I didn't know what the source was at the time. And when I say source, I do literally mean, you know, God. So fast forward to today, almost everything's been flipped on its head. I'm a big supporter of certain types of traditional values, not everything, but especially I think that it's very important for society that you have stable marriages. I think it's very important for society that you have stable families. I think to have those things, you need a certain level of maturity of humanity. I think to have that, you need to, again, turn to God to help you get there. So in a lot of respects, my worldview could be kind of described as traditional conservative in certain respects. But again, there's a lot of pain that drove me to seek answers. I left high school. I dropped out of college. I was a musician as well. I spent literally all day, every day, partying for several years and feeling completely numb on the inside despite that. And then one day I just thought to myself, well, I've just kind of had it with this place. Nothing gives me satisfaction. Is there something that I can learn from this pain? Is there actual meaning to this? That's what I asked myself circa maybe 19, 20 years old. And then the interesting thing that happened after that was a whole bunch of synchronistic occurrences started happening. I had a friend who was into shamanic, spirit animal medicine kind of stuff. And she told me that, she said, you have, your spirit animal is deer. And to me, it was like, cool, sure, why not? I didn't know what it meant. And then deer started following me everywhere I went pretty much for several months. I wrote about this on one of my Substacks. So that got me really thinking, well, what if the universe actually is responding to what goes on in my consciousness, in my mind, and in consciousness in general? And it was just, it just snowballed from there. I started reading Buckminster Fuller, was a big inspiration. I started reading all kinds of spiritual philosophies, and I know my time just came up. So I'll summarize by saying that basically I found God through synchronistic events that led me to that knowledge, which then led me to Walter Russell, to Chris Langan, whole bunch of other guys that have a not just a faith-based, but a truly logical, mathematical conception of the divine. And then from there, it was how do we serve the divine? That became the overriding question ever since.
Did it take courage to step outside, or to correct errors in thinking and step outside of acceptable fields of study? Mark?
I'm not sure if courage is the word that I would use to describe it. To me, it feels more like a necessity, because once a worldview shifts, then priorities tend to shift with it. And what might have seemed like it was courageous previously is now just the only option. And that's how I've continued to feel on my journey. But I will say that fear of judgment and other repercussions does come up. So that has to be overcome. And like I mentioned in my philosophical journey, there are lots of paradigms that I have shifted on. And as I write books and speak about these various topics, what I'll find is that there's alignment in certain areas, but then I cover a new topic in which I'm sort of cannibalizing my previous audience. So I constantly am trying to think through, is that something I want to do? These are the consequences that I know I'm going to have to deal with. But then the sense of responsibility comes up where, Paul, like you were alluding to, I have this sense of service, that we are here to be service vessels. And that seems to override whatever fear comes up.
Paul, you want to take this one?
Sure thing. Yeah, for me, how do I explain this? I wouldn't necessarily describe courage. Kind of like Mark just said, it was almost the only way I can really put words onto it is that finding my way to the worldview and the things that I believe today was a bit like just almost being pulled like a magnet towards a destination. I can look back on my life and see how even as a young kid, the seeds, as it were, for the person I am today were already present. They were just buried under a whole bunch of programming. And so, yeah, there's definitely a lot of condemnation that comes from, in particular, academia, or my whole social environment growing up. Like I said before, it was very, very left-leaning. So you do face sometimes categorical denunciation from people for leaving that paradigm behind. And yeah, I guess in the beginning, pursuing truth felt like it was fraught with danger, and yet at the same time, to not do so was fraught with even more danger. So in certain respects, I almost feel like I took the safer path in a way. So yeah, I feel it was very much driven by necessity.
Matt?
Yeah, that's a good question. Correcting errors in thinking, to touch on what John said earlier about pattern recognition is part of the consciousness realization. Consciousness does think in patterns. You can verify that with study and observation of nature. So for me, the courage was really a cumulative process. And you could say that when you develop courage, when it's cumulative enough, when there's enough of it, you don't need it anymore because it becomes part of you. You sort of face any challenge with that same, basically, courage is a characteristic of character itself, just like strength, intelligence, determination, charisma, all these constitution, basically what's in a D&D character, you could also add a few more things to that and say that's what's in a human being, because these, characters in video games are based on certain strengths, certain techniques, and we're all sort of our own character in our own play. And the more we face these situations, correct errors in our own thinking, which cause undesired patterns of pain, if you will, like being in a certain political divide, for instance, can bring a lot of pain if it's the wrong one, because some demand that you sacrifice yourself in order to be part of it, a collectivist paradigm, for instance, which we're seeing a lot of that in the streets. Just take a look around you and there it is, the self-murdered leading the masses through chaotic scenes. But in order to step outside of those, correcting those errors in myself, I had to more or less face the patterns that I didn't like. And that's sort of, I think anybody coming into the truth, the study of truth, or at least a higher version of it, when you're on that path, you have to face yourself ultimately as the most fearsome force that's standing in your way. And again, I think as you identify with what are the patterns, what are the things that keep me from, you know, working and developing my character, the more you do this, the less you fear of the outside world. So in a sense, I think our basic survival as a species and our ability to go within and really deal with the inner turmoil, the shadows of that we all possess, we can each come to the light from multiple different places on the world, on the planet, different systems of belief, as we all here have our own independent story as well. But we each came to a point where we're able to even sit and have a discussion like this. So,
John?
Yes and no, I guess is the way to say it. No, in the sense that I kind of have a long history of being the outcast, whether it's academia or socially or otherwise. So I've always, I guess early on, I cultivated a certain comfort with not being accepted, and I'm pretty stubborn. So those two things kind of go together and have always sort of led me to kind of be that guy to say the thing that nobody else wants to say. And at the same time, I spent over 20 years. I was 16 when I started, 39 now. I think it's, what is that, getting close to 25 years of martial arts, which, if anything, if nothing else, you know, it teaches you to not just face your fears, but, you know, you face danger itself and all the anxieties around that. But as Teddy Atlas has said brilliantly many a time, you know, oftentimes, you know, spectators look at a boxer when they get in the ring and, you know, that guy is fearless, and he's like, no, they're not fearless. Like, they're scared when they get in there. Listen to what Mike Tyson says about it. He says he was happy when he retired because he didn't have to be scared all the time anymore. This is a guy who also referred to himself as a god, right, when he would walk into the ring. So so I say yes and no, because in some ways it's sort of I mean, and this gets back to sort of what I was trying to get at in terms of my definition of consciousness. Like the core of it is that part. It's not necessarily just the pattern recognition, but it's the part within you, the will or the faith, that when you recognize the pattern, right, you have different ways to respond to it. Like everything that I learned about ed tech, right? If I was a man without morals or integrity, I could have easily made myself a tenure track professor by just saying what is popular about it, because I know enough about all the trendy stuff, and I know the buzzwords where I could write stuff to make it look like I'm on board with it and get grants and get tenure and all that type of stuff. But I went the opposite route, and that is a decision, right? That's at the point at which, you know, that fork in the road branches out from this pattern that you recognize. Which decision you make ultimately comes from that core, that essence of the consciousness, that will or that faith. And that often requires you to go up against what are fears. And, you know, the way it turned out was, you know, as I wrote the book and as I was more and more public, I kept waiting for somebody to get a hold of the book or an interview, especially when I started talking against lockdowns, and have somebody say something like, you know, get rid of this guy. But lo and behold, it never actually happened. And so, you know, it turns out that, you know, which tends to be my experience, is that if you're willing to face the fear and you're willing to act in accordance with what you think is right, which again indicates that right, it's not just about my business potential or my you know, my career potential, but it's about doing what is right, in line with the order of the universe and the transcendent law of God. But most of the time it works out, right? Most of the time it works out when you do that. And I think that's, in my opinion, that's I think part of what the Apostle Paul was getting at when he says the faith of things is the evidence of things unseen, right? There's no guarantee when you take that leap of faith, but when it turns out that way, that's sort of the evidence that your faith was accurate. So
How is it possible that millions of industrious people can be oppressed by a handful of rulers? Matt?
Well, just talked about it. Fear, I think, it's the mind killer, as Frank Herbert said. I know, at least speaking personally, and I really can only speak personally, that when I was afraid of certain things, those things were always on my ass, you could say. I was one of the few that I knew, at least in the state, in the city I lived in 2002, to be aware of 9/11 as not what they told us it was. And so when you're studying this stuff and your own fear gets a hold of you and you think you're being watched by the local cops, and maybe you are, maybe you're not. I mean, these are the specters we can create in our minds that produce that anxiety that then has to be overcome. But it was like, the more I thought about, being afraid of this oppression of the ruling authorities, whatever it is, could be a person, it could be a agency, it could be anything, the more it seemed to be on me. So I would get more tickets, I would get pulled over more frequently. But then once I started to realize over time, and it takes time to build that immunity, spiritual immunity against your own fears, not much less the fears of the media. Everybody has to come out of that hypnosis, as Paul would say. Dehypnotization is a process, and it can take years. But I think as you do that, your fears subside and you get the courage, and like John would say, through training in martial arts or some other endeavor, maybe as Mark would do with writing, putting forth his ideas to paper. That's an act, a revolutionary act within yourself. And it's that revolutionary within yourself that helps to dispel the shadows, the Watiko, or the things of the mind that can linger and harbor ill results. So it's a process. It's I think that's, there's obviously mind control programs, there's psychological warfare to the nth degree in multiple militaries and governments around the world who are in lockstep with the WEF, the WHO, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. We could go on and on and on. The Illuminati, which I like to term the Deluminati, because they don't act with light, they act with darkness. And it's sort of that magic, that black magic of inversion, which is their signature. Getting a sign on that, a sight on it, and keeping that, as your forefront. If it's inverted, if it's upside down, if it's advising against my better judgment and my still small voice, dispel it, kick it out, get rid of it, because it's only going to bring ill results. And these are the things that industrious people can do to end this kind of an oppression. It takes an inner and an outer awareness working together simultaneously.
Paul, you want to answer this one?
The question of how does a small group of people control millions and millions of people is, in fact, one of the main reasons why I decided that I wanted to learn hypnosis. And after quite some time thinking about it, just to give you guys and the audience out there a very, very 10-second background on what hypnosis is. Hypnosis is any form of communication that bypasses your critical factor, that is accepted by the subconscious mind, which then generates a response that feels real in some sense. That's all hypnosis is. It's all hypnosis ever has been. It's all it's ever going to be. And so if hypnosis works by bypassing your critical factor, well, then the answer to not being hypnotized is to strengthen your critical factor. There's a correct way to do that. There's a not as good way to do that. I'm not going to get too into that right now to stay with the question here, but essentially, if you let's say I want to get a mass of people to believe something, what I'm going to do is I'm going to if I have enough resources, and a certain amount of resources is necessary for this, because it's a boiling frogs process. It's a slow accumulation of power, which then allows them to do greater and greater campaigns of influence and mind control. So if I wanted to change people's mind about something, what I would do is I would get a bunch of media outlets, I would make sure that people don't realize that those media outlets are all actually taking cues from me. I would label them different things. Oh, this is conservative news over here. This is liberal news over here. This is a different type of news. I would make sure that your average person out there does not see them as being part of the same enterprise. That's a very, very key detail. After that happens, then I would just make sure that they're all on the same page, sending the same message. The reason why, because most people, and this is true for very, very intelligent people, this is something that we all need to be vigilant about. It does not matter if everybody is in agreement that you talk to, you still have to do the thinking yourself. There is no way around that. Again, if you hear the same thing from 7, 8 or so seemingly non-connected people, the same story, most people's subconscious minds will implicitly take that story as true. The implicit taking of a story as being true, again, that is hypnosis. That is fundamentally what it is. So I think it's a slow burn. They've been acquiring power. They've been studying how to manipulate consciousness, and they've been buying and purchasing levers of influence for generations and generations. And that is how a small group of people can control millions.
John?
So yeah, I could maybe talk about the external mechanisms by which people are controlled by the power structure. But since this roundtable is focusing on the nature of consciousness, maybe I think I should focus on what is happening internally into the exploited and the subjected that renders them exploitable. And so there's a few things. I mean, so we touched on the fear component. And as Paul sort of lines up, that the fear of all the scary stuff that's beamed at us in the propaganda is sort of reinforced by a belief in the broader system, which oftentimes we sort of get through osmosis, either just through the mainstream messages in media, but also in our everyday discourse with people who just parrot headlines. And there's a dialectic between this fear and all of the dangers that are sort of put out there in propaganda, and the belief that the system is going to save them, right? That if they just go along with the collective, if they parrot what other people say, that there's a safety in that. And to come outside of that is to, necessarily have to, again, bridge that fear. And this requires you to basically acknowledge that most, if not pretty much all of what you've believed has been a lie, which is a scary thing because, right, if you believe that, first of all, everything that you thought you could rely on, you're basically left starting from scratch. And if you know that there's no one coming to save you anymore, all that's left is basically a radical acceptance of your own limitations, and the ability to question the presuppositions that you hold that sort of leads you to conform with the collective, and basically the guidance of conscience that basically tells yourself that it's up to you ultimately, that you have to take responsibility. And the only way to do that, again, is to basically take a very scary account of, right, what's actually happening in the power structure. Basically, all the mountain you have to climb in terms of overcoming all the limitations that you've sort of placated to. And so without that, I think that basically, you're the fear and the comfort of just going along with the collective is almost, as Paul puts it, a state of hypnosis. So really the only thing that on the other flip side of the coin, the thing that would motivate somebody to sort of get out of that paradigm is, again, is a deep conscience that not only that no one's coming to save you and then it's up to you to save yourself, but that it's the right thing to do, that you ought to not just do it for yourself, but for the sake of others, which again is to align with the transcendent order of God in the universe.
Mark?
I want to preface my answer by first establishing that it is possible for a small number of people to control the masses, because I know that is a topic of debate sometimes. And the evidence is what we've been through for the last 3+ years, where a small number of people who had opinions about the pandemic imposed those opinions and controlled the whole world in unison. So that to me is strong evidence without even having to go any further than that. So how were they able to do that? And I think the answers given so far have spoken to this. Fear, hypnosis. To me, the term ignorance also comes to mind. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I mean it objectively, where people are ignorant of what the truth is through the constant inversion in many different areas. I also think the weaponization of compassion enables this, because it's much harder to get people to do things if they think they're consciously doing evil, whereas if they think they're doing something good, then they can feel righteous in their actions. So get the jab, wear your mask, don't leave your home, stay away from people. You're doing that to save people. That was the messaging. So it's much easier to control people through that. And also, I want to acknowledge the sophistication that's required for all of this. And my mind goes to the MK Ultra government programs, where this has been studied to be able to control people's minds on an individuated level. And it seems to me that those individual experiments that have been conducted are being applied on a macro level through the media, through the education system, and through all forms of information. And to me, this even speaks to a higher level of deception, which is what I alluded to earlier, this dark force, this force that is obstructed from love and goodness, that would even want to do something like this and to deceive the masses. I think, to me, it just seems too evil what's happening in the world to think that it's just some happenstance occurrence. There's some kind of intelligence that's transcending what we see with our eyes, that is somehow flowing into the vessels of the human beings on this planet.
How do we sharpen our discernment in times of universal deceit? Paul?
To sharpen your discernment, that's kind of funny actually, because I was literally just talking about strengthening that critical factor. So yeah, to my mind, discernment has a lot to do with, basically you have a part of your brain that is capable of saying no to things, and no equals gnosis, no equals knowledge. You don't demonstrate knowledge by saying yes to everything. You demonstrate knowledge by having discernment, the ability to the ability to say no to that which is untrue. The way to develop that, in my experience, is you just kind of have to get your hands dirty and play with reality. You just have to form experiments in thought, in your own life. You have to try things out. You have to, step one, really, if there is a step one, is you have to realize that, you know, if somebody else knows how a quasar works and they tell you that they know how it works, or how a black hole works, that's not the same thing as you knowing how it works. You have to recognize that the knowledge that other people have is not the knowledge that you have. It's knowledge that you have when you have acquired it. Excuse me. And so what you got to do is you have to employ a two-pronged approach, in my opinion. One is the empirical method, and the other one, which academia tends to discount, is I've heard it described as sort of rational idealism, which is basically the idea that there are certain types of knowledge that can be a priori discovered through operations of logic, absent any kind of empirical process of discernment. And one example of that would just simply be, you know, we all know that 1 + 1 = 2. We know that 1 + 1 = 2 because it's inherent in the definition of 1 that to double it makes 2. It's also self-evident that 1 + 1 will equal 2 now. It's going to equal 2 tomorrow. It's going to equal 2 no matter where in the universe you are. So you have to, and John touched on this, it can be very scary because you recognize that you're kind of floating in an ocean of uncertainty, but you just have to start discerning what is logically consistent on its face on the one hand, and on the other hand, for anything that you can't do that with, you just have to live life and experiment. You got to get your hands dirty sometimes to grow a garden, as it were. Yeah, it's hard to summarize a full-fledged discernment coaching program in 3 minutes or so, but make predictions, test those predictions, see if they pan out. Try to be as logically consistent as possible. Know that you can't offload the responsibility of knowing things onto anybody ever. You have a responsibility to know for yourself. If you approach life with that attitude, I think it's just about impossible to not develop a really strong probative faculty over a period of several years.
Mark?
There's a prerequisite to sharpening discernment, in my view, which is the desire to do so. We live in a world with so much deception that if you just go with the flow and don't consciously try to discern and just listen to the experts, then you're going to be in trouble. So there has to be this desire, as Paul was alluding to actually ask the questions and take personal responsibility. That's a big part of everything that's happening in the world, is that we're constantly being told to offload responsibility to experts and not question them. So there is the need to then question everything that we're told, question every presupposition, like John said, and ask ourselves, how do we know the things that we believe we know? And if you really ask that question deeply, one will come to a point where you say, well, I believe this because I read about it here, and this person saw it from someone else. And going through that process will, at least in my own experience, lead to probabilistic beliefs, where I don't know anything for certain other than it feels like I'm conscious at this very moment. Literally, that's the only thing I know with certainty. Everything else, I have probabilistic beliefs based on various pieces of evidence. And my process has also been twofold. One is to learn things, so objective knowledge. And the other is to use intuition, which is more of a gut feeling. And that's harder to describe because it's intangible. There's a combination of knowledge and intuition that, in my experience, has required trial and error. So I try it out with something, and then I get feedback based on the results of the world, and then I use that to calibrate my future discernment.
How about you, John?
I like what Paul and Mark have started with. Maybe I can try to synthesize this a little bit in my response. So first of all, in terms of, I think there's sort of an epistemological dimension to it. And this requires constant metacognition in terms of, always sort of asking yourself, do I really know what I think I know? My best window into this comes through writing, which is when I write something, I'm probably excessive with citations. But I make sure that everything that I wrote in there, every sentence has at least one citation, unless the sentence is purely my analysis of the previous citation, right? In fact, actually, I recently did around in the process of doing a lecture series for Richard Grove's Grand Theft World, or his Autonomy University. It's a separate platform that he has. And to brush up on my slides that I was putting together, this just gives you a sort of a window into how diligent you should be with this metacognitive self-critiquing. And that is, when I was making slides, I didn't just assume that I remembered. I went into the book and pulled up the old citations, and then guess what I did? I went up and pulled up the links again just to make sure that I actually didn't make a mistake in the book that I already published, right? And so, in general, most people run with headlines or they run with what they've heard, and because they've heard, this gets back to what Paul was saying, because they've heard so many people say it, they've heard experts say it, they've seen it in the TV, right? They think that, well, it must be true. They just assume. But But then the other component here, as Mark points out, is that there has to be this desire to be that diligent, the desire to be self-critical, to question presupposition, right? It's not a natural inclination. Like it's easiest to operate in a relatively sort of autopilot, state of consciousness. And so that requires, again, to even have to think about, right, that you might have some fundamental errors in your thinking, again, can elicit a certain fear. And I think that, again, there's a spiritual dimension here in which you have to cultivate the spiritual willpower, the faith of the mind, to be able to even broach that subject. And I think a lot of times, if we find ourselves, if we're in that place where we have to question everything fundamentally, it's not necessarily just a scouring of the research and the primary sources that will get you there. I mean, that's part of the process. But I think oftentimes what's helped me in my own life is getting back to very difficult physical martial arts training. It doesn't have to necessarily be, it's actually not the sparring, it's the running, which is what I hate to do. And it gets you in the mentality of doing the things you don't want to do and pushing through it nonetheless, and basically having to suffer to gain not just the willpower but the knowledge you need to navigate this world.
Matt?
Well, definitely 3 words right off the bat. Read, think, study. I could add a 4th, contemplate. I agree with everybody's views on this. You got to exercise the muscle to create the discernment. And so thinking about things deeply is something that will bring about the kind of discernment that will keep you sharp in this world. You got to develop your intuition, be into it, right? Are you into it? That builds character, the ability to discern that what you're being told. I don't know how many of you guys, when you're confronted with the COVID thing, but from the very get-go, both Lori and I were like, there's no way in hell that we're going to do any of the stuff that they recommend we do. We're not going to wear one mask. We're not going to, stay 6 feet apart. We're hugging people at the local Walmart, for God's sakes. And everybody was horrified. But to us, it was like, what is this thing that they want us to do? We're not even going to go there. So that's a form of discernment, is right out of the gate, being able to say, call bullshit when you have to call it, and I like to say they got me with 9/11 2001, but they will never get me again on any psychological warfare operation. So to discern and to strengthen and sharpen that in these kinds of times of universal deceit, I would just say there's what's called problem, reaction, solution, but there's no such thing, at least not in the conspiracy circles of research, called problem, response, solution. And being a first responder on 2 volunteer fire departments, I can tell you right now, chaos would be the only thing that would ensue if we showed up to an emergency call and reacted to what we saw. So when we get there, we respond, and we respond because we've trained. And when you train, you're giving yourself, you're exercising that muscle that we call discernment. That's how I'd answer that.
Why is it so hard for truth to assert itself against lies and defamation? Why is it not the other way around, that lies have to assert themselves against the truth? Matt, want to start?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. Luke, where does that question come from? I believe you pulled that up from
I took that from Wilhelm Reich. It's a book called God, Ether, Devil. He asks a bunch of different questions, and I thought they're appropriate.
Yeah, that's a great one. Well, lies do have to do a lot of work. I would say that it is hard for lies to do a lot of work. Look at the billions of dollars they have to put into the media complex, the billions of dollars they have to put into coordinating all of this stuff, the training, the heart coherence training that they have to do in corporate environments to get everybody on the page of, you know, this idea of global world order. I've ran sound for 15 years in St. Louis as a A1, and I put microphones on presidents and CEOs of corporations and mostly Fortune 500 companies. And the main gist of all this stuff boiled down from Pepsi-Cola, Frito-Lay, MasterCard, International. I've done WEF conferences for Monsanto. I've worked for all kinds of these Fortune 500 companies. And the one thing they always boil down is they tell their employees by the thousands that gather at these things for training and for breakout sessions that this company is a global company now. And that was kind of the main theme. So there's a lot of money that goes into this, and it's not easy for them to put on all this stuff and to put forward this particular agenda. So I know it takes as much work as it does to dispel it. So would it be so hard for truth to assert itself? I think that would be where it comes down to the individual, because you can't approach the truth of anything collectively, at least not in my opinion. I've found that, you know, people don't wake up collectively from my experience. You can't just go into a room and everybody thinks 9/11 is exactly how CNN said it was. And yet you do one presentation and all of these 500 people in the room suddenly agree, yeah, it wasn't what CNN said it was. It's got to be an individual path to the truth. And I think that's the selling of the path itself is better if you promote the path of authenticity and originality as coming to truth, as opposed to buying into it. You're going to get a lot more people on board. And as my Lori would say, plant seeds, not forests, because whenever I planted forests, everybody in the room got turned off by it. So you just got to get people interested, one small thing at a time.
John?
I would just say that ultimately, truth is the scarier thing all the time, in the sense that go to sort of reiterate what I had suggested in previous response, was that it's ultimately up to you. And the problem is probably that there are some things that you need to change about yourself. It's going to require a lot of hard work and a lot of suffering, and it's going to be scary in the meantime. I did a speech at the American Freedom Alliance back last year. I think it was October. It's October last year, and actually Steve Bannon was the keynote speaker there, and he said something that I really disagreed with, and he was pointing out that how there's people with six-figure salaries that are living paycheck to paycheck. I immediately think about how much money I make. It's not six figures, all right? It's not very close at all. Actually, it's nowhere near that, right? And I'm not living paycheck to paycheck. Why? Because I'm a pretty frugal guy, right? I don't spend money on things that I don't need, right? Like, that's an example of what, right? The problem is probably what you're doing. It's not business. It's not government, right? I mean, to the extent that they make your life harder, there are actually plenty of solutions that you have at your disposal, but they require you to basically start from scratch with very few resources, climbing up not just a steep hill, but basically climbing straight up a cliff. And so oftentimes, again, it's easier and perhaps more comfortable to just believe the lies, because then you don't have to do anything and you can blame it on somebody else, right? And so that I think that's my most concise way of explaining why people swallow lies. It's because not that it's actually safer or more comfortable, but it just ultimately requires less effort, right? And they can reinforce the cognitive dissonance by pointing to whoever, business, government, you name it.
Mark?
We live in a world where we are told basic aspects about the nature of reality from a very young age. And it seems to be that many of those things we're taught are lies. So our entry presuppositions, because of what we're taught from a young age, I'm saying we generally in terms of society, means that we have to go against the grain in order to get to the truth. So the system seems to be set up against truth. And why that is a much deeper question about what's the history of this planet. That's beyond the scope of this question. But that's our starting point, is that we have to go against the grain. And I also think that repetition significantly assists with the proliferation of lies. And ultimately, it becomes a form of hypnosis, as I'm sure Paul will talk about. I also want to address what Matt said in terms of counteracting this and not forcing the truth on people. It's something I've had to work on myself, because I come across something that shifts my own paradigm and I have this desire to share it with people. But everyone's at a different stage of development with regard to different paradigms, and not everyone is receptive to certain types of information. So there's a hybrid of being both active and passive in this process of getting through the lies, which is the being active is getting the information out in some way, and the passivity is in a tactful way of getting the information across without being overly forceful, because being overly forceful can actually turn people off such that they end up believing the lies even more.
Mark? Oh, no, sorry, Paul.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off of what Mark just said, because that's a very important point. It's, it is my opinion, we'll put it that way. It's my opinion that at least some of the, you know, I'll call it the Alex Jones style. I don't mean to pick on him per se. He's famous for having a bombastic style. That's why I'm referring to him. You see a lot of posts on social media that are just like, oh, you got to shout the truth from the rooftops. You got to bust people's programming. And the problem is that that's kind of encouraging people to take a very combative way of approaching things. In my experience, if you take a combative way of approaching things, if you make somebody feel defensive at all, you know, you might have won the argument on one level, but you didn't get them to change their mind. It's very, very hard to get people to change their mind about anything while at the same time making them feel defensive. And this is a very key thing that people need to realize, especially if you're going to go trying to really change people's fundamental viewpoints on different things, which is something that is a worthy task. It needs to be done because we are living in an empire of lies. For whatever reason, I got my tongue got twisted trying to say that, but in any event, look, there's a number of factors causing people to choose lies. There's ego considerations. There's just what John mentioned earlier. People just want to believe certain things because it is more complementary to them to look at the world that way. There's also the factor of, you know, people implicitly trust government. Not so much these days, but I'll expand that concept even further. People trust authority, however they define it for themselves. If they were to find out that the powers that be intentionally caused 9/11, or that the lockdowns are bogus, and that the jab has caused people, you know, mass infertility, that these guys are monsters that are trying to cull the population, all this stuff, in my opinion, is 100% true. But if you were to share that with perhaps your unawake person, for lack of a better way of putting it, what they might experience if they were to take what you're saying it like fully automatically right then and there, that would be the equivalent of like a little child, because again, that level of trusting, it's childlike, and I don't mean that in an insulting way. I mean that literally. When we are children, we look to authority to tell us what reality is. And so if your authority figures turned out to be bad guys, that would be psychologically kind of the equivalent for a lot of people of being a kid and watching your own parents turn into a three-headed monster in front of you. So the reason why lies, and I'll summarize again. I'm learning how to land the plane faster, y'all. But yeah, there's just a lot of incentives essentially at a psychological subconscious level for people. You have to tap into, most people wants to achieve their full potential in life, and that is the leverage that you can use to help people realize that there's so much more to life than what they're currently living and seeing. And that could be a way, as Matt said, plant seeds, just give people what they can handle at that moment, and you may find that they'll come back asking for more later, once they've gotten past whatever those blocks may be.
Did COVID-19 and the pandemic help or hurt the world? Mark?
I would say both. I can make arguments on both sides. In terms of how it hurt the world, it's pretty obvious. There were people that got sick and died. There were totalitarian measures placed on people. Children were kept out of schools. People were kept apart from each other. So I think we're going to see the fallout from this for a long time to come. The positive side of it is that it woke a lot of people up, myself included, in terms of how the world actually works, and that large scale darkness can take hold of this planet very quickly, and to be aware of that. So I think the last few years have forced people to harness their discernment and to actually have that on their radar. It might not have been something they even considered, to question authority and to question what's presented. And now for many of us, when a narrative is presented, the first thing we do is ask, what are they trying to achieve through this narrative? So ultimately, the world was awoken to the notion that there are wolves in sheep's clothing.
Paul, you want to take this?
Of course, I would agree. I think that in the immediate, a lot of harm was caused, but a part of me thinks that the deep state overplayed its hand, and in the process might have guaranteed its own demise. I'm not gonna say that that's a definite, but it does seem very possible to me. I think that there's a lot of people who I've heard from people, again, going back to the planting seeds. I've heard from people that came back to me years later after I tried to share them, something truthful, realizing because of COVID that all this stuff that I was trying to tell them years ago, holy, there might be something to this. That's now where they're coming from. So I definitely think that I've observed it like really hasten people's willingness to question, willingness to go against the crowd. If you go on Twitter and you see what's trending these days, it's all, we will not comply. For every post where somebody's praising Dr. Fauci that has 100 likes, there's 100 posts, calling him out for a fraud with 1,000 likes on it. And let's not, mistake social media for reality. But at the same time, that is a very promising thing to see. So I would say that in the long term, I think it ultimately helped us immensely, but we're not out of the woods yet. We need to figure out how to reverse a lot of the damage from these jabs, and there's a lot of people that have answers to that. I'm not one of those people. I'm currently looking into it myself. But yeah, necessity will drive a lot of innovation. Tyranny will awaken the spark of freedom in people, and I think the deep state overplayed their hand at the end of the day.
How about you, John?
I mean, fundamentally, at its core, bad, right? I mean, just as an operation, the mandates, the jabs, everything that came along with that, the disruption of supply chains, transfer of wealth. I mean, I go on and on and on, right? But I will say that, and I'll use a martial arts analogy, right? Like, so in order for me to engage the opponent, right, whether I want to strike or I want to clinch or I want to grapple or whatever I want to do, right, I have to make a commitment to a particular technique, right? And maybe I did a really good job of, right, reading his body language and knowing what he is going to do next in a way where when I commit to that technique, right, the odds that I'm going to land it are very high, right? But in order for me to, once I make that commitment, I necessarily open myself up, right? So with all the predictive analytics that they have, right, they ultimately can't predict what is the response is going to be when they go to execute the probability of whatever they think is gonna work out, right? So when I go to clinch or when I go to strike, I might have read everything as perfectly as I could have, but I might end up opening myself up for a counter, right? And so as an example, I always like to point out that if it weren't for lockdowns, I wouldn't have all these books you see behind me, or about 99% of them, because those are all charlatans. And it was because I was online because of lockdowns that I was able to live with her for a whole month. Like if I had to go to the classroom every week, I wouldn't have been able to make that trip, right? I mean, this is an example of something that they cannot account for, right? They can plot out, how effective will the lockdowns be, but they can't plot out that someone like me is going to go and basically salvage all this research that they would have loved to just go into the dustbin of history, right? So with any horrible event, there's always, to use the analogy again, every move has a counter, every counter has a counter, right? And so, perhaps they did show their hand or force their agenda too quickly. And I like to think as we try to roll out this next lockdown here, or at least what appears to be, perhaps a burgeoning lockdown coming up, that it's good that people are awake and aware in ways that they haven't been, and they've awoken that will, or so to speak, that I've sort of been alluding to. But it's what we need to be careful of next is that people don't get carried away with how they respond. I believe, I want to say it was Paul, maybe it was both Paul and Mark, who basically pointed out that aggressive or confrontational tactics not only are not effective in terms of persuading people to sort of wake them up or get them off the agenda, but there is an active psyop that's been in action for some time, where they want to instigate, right, inflammatory or otherwise overreactions in ways where they can demonize any resistance, labeling people terrorists, etc. So as long as we can keep that thing under control, I think that hopefully, yes, that the ultimate effect will be more people waking up and more momentum on our side in the long run.
Matt?
Well, I'll just read a post I made, which kind of covers that. I wrote, "Yes, the world is burning. It is," and let me just preface that with, there's a photo of Gandalf and his quote, "All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." And basically I wrote, "Yes, the world is burning. It is clear that the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, as is this global takeover. Things are not quite going to plan. The cabal didn't plan for you to decide what to do with your time. They did not plan for you to follow your heart and pursue your dreams. They did not plan for you to wake up to their bullshit. And they sure as hell didn't plan for you to discover your true power, that you and you alone are your own master, a higher ordered soul whose very life is far more important than their best laid plans for your enslavement. You see, they can't control that, which by extension means they can't control you. You know the value of your own time, and in order to master that, you must command it. The secret to beating the New World Order is to overcome their one-way street of fear, thereby realizing that the universe is far more than they would have you believe it is. All a man or woman has to do is to decide what to do. It starts within, And that YO universe is as vast as the whole of the universe without. And so I think that it definitely, as Mark said, I have to agree, it hurt, but it also helped, possibly to exacting degrees. But nonetheless, what I'm seeing, you know, the very thing called Cause Fest, Creative Artists Uniting for the Sovereignty of Everyone, was a response by Courtney and Houston to this very thing. We wouldn't be sitting here if, you know, we weren't all at that event. And so to me, I think the good definitely seems to outweigh the negatives that came from it, and not discounting the cost of human life, because that's tragic in and of itself. But just the fact that I think it's sort of like you said, John, it's exercising, you know, there's a counter to every counter. And now the human race is a little bit stronger for the infraction against all of us. So we're going to be ready. We're more ready, I should say, should this occur again, which it already is trying to occur again. So hopefully we've got what it takes to make a more firm stand this time.
How does your work specifically deal with mass formation psychosis? John?
Can't say that I've explicitly tackled it, but I suppose, you know, the solutions to my book involve you know, reforming the education system. It's like a 5-point program, but the ones that are germane to your question here is return to the classical trivium method, so grammar, logic, and rhetoric, but grounding that in metaphysics, a metaphysical philosophy. And the way that sort of dovetails or addresses mass formation psychosis is that, you know, much of mass formation psychosis is the result of, obviously, you know, propaganda efforts. So it's through the trivium, through the understanding of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, that you can dispel the fallacies in government and corporate propaganda. You know, as I detail in the book, you know, we don't teach grammar anymore. We don't teach logic anymore. You might be lucky if you get some rhetoric later on in high school, or perhaps in college if you go there. But you know, in the grade school, elementary years, which used to be called grammar school, right? The reason why they're no longer called grammar school, right? We have whole language learning, you know, removal of phonics. They teach grammar in context, which means you don't diagram a sentence anymore, which means you can't understand the symbols that you're reading or that you're hearing in the propaganda. Without logic, you can't understand contradictory constructions, right? So, and if you can't understand, you know, the 3 laws of logic, identity, contradiction, or sometimes called non-contradiction or tautology, you can't really point out any of either the formal or the informal fallacies in that propaganda. And so then that basically leaves you in a state where your understanding of the propaganda is necessarily nothing more than a reflection of what the people around you are saying and what the institutions and authorities are saying. And that's the mass formation part, right? Because it's not just that you can't understand the propaganda. It's that, right, your only ability to navigate through everything without the compass of the trivium is to basically just parrot what everybody else is doing. So in that way, the solutions in my book provide a certain tool for bulwarking against mass formation psychosis.
Mark?
I've found in my experience that people shift. And when I say shift, I mean are able to break through their programming, their mass formation psychosis, in 2 ways. One is through learning about information, so knowledge, and the other is direct experience. Direct experience seems to be the fastest way for people to shift. And in the realm of consciousness, let's say I used to be a hardcore materialist. I thought life was random and meaningless. I find that people shift when they have a near-death experience, a psychedelic account, something happens in meditation, And you don't really have to explain much to them because they've directly experienced it. And in the world, let's say someone in business saw corruption. They might be much more inclined to recognize that evil can exist on a mass scale that could be manipulating people. My approach so far, since I've started writing, is more on the knowledge side. I found that takes more time because having a paradigm shift just based on information requires a conscious undoing of all of one's past assumptions. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's almost like the information comes in, you have to absorb it and digest it. And then you think about your old paradigm, and then it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And you have to be really disciplined to want to take that path of knowledge. But it's been my personal path. So I feel most familiar with that. And that's been my mode of trying to help people break through this. And like I've said, it starts with my own breaking through. What are the pieces of information that seem to help me see through my presuppositions and where they were wrong? And then I try to synthesize that and share it with other people through writing and speaking.
Paul?
So one of the goals that I have with the hypnosis work that I do is, you know, I started learning it partly because I just wanted that experiential, you know, in psychology, you can read and read and read and talk and talk and talk and talk. But with hypnosis, you really get to the crux of the matter very quickly. It's like, can I speak in such a way as to cause some kind of state or behavior change in another person? And can I recognize when that's being done to me? So, you know, I've spent a lot of time learning the mechanics of it. I've been on both ends of it. I've allowed myself to receive hypnotherapy from other people. I've done hypnosis with people. Basically, one of the things that I've learned is that if you don't have to tell a magnet to join another magnet, it does it on its own. So if people are in touch with their highest selves, and I mean in a genuine, visceral way, they become basically self-governing. They're like the magnet that has found its other part, and you don't have to tell them. You know, it's not necessary to get them to you know, adhere to truth, learn, you know, continue their own learning journey on their own, so on and so forth. So for me, you know, one of the big goals of what I do is I want to distribute knowledge of hypnosis as far and wide as possible. What I've put together on my Substack is an encapsulation in a lot of cases. I have an article called A Primer on Hypnosis, and that article is maybe 4 or 5 pages long, and it's a synthesis of years of thinking about how to, as succinctly as possible, describe how hypnosis works. And so I think I hope as many people in the world possible know about this sort of thing, because it's actually a lot simpler than many would think. And again, it just comes down to awareness and prevention. Again, hypnosis is communication that bypasses the critical factor. Strengthening the critical factor is how you deal with that. And I'll leave everybody with a metaphor for this, and that is, think of your subconscious mind. It's like think of the world as like a giant soccer game, and your subconscious mind is the goal, and the soccer ball is suggestions that they keep trying to put in there. Your critical factor is like the goalie that intercepts those suggestions. So you learn how to do that, and you're you know, as close to psychologically invincible as a person can be. And I really do mean that. And I want as many people in the world to understand that just about all of us have the capacity to achieve our highest potential and intercept those negative suggestions from weaponized media and weaponized culture, and so on and so forth. So that's how what I'm doing dovetails with mass formation psychosis prevention.
Awesome. Matt, did you answer this one? Yes, you did. Okay, the next question is, what is your favorite quote and why? Mark?
Dr. David Hawkins, who was a psychiatrist and spiritual teacher later in his life when he had a massive awakening, He said, your contribution to the world is the perfection of your own self. And there's a lot in that statement in terms of how to think about living one's life and how to even deal with the craziness we see in the world around us. I think it starts with the inner work. And then when we perfect ourselves or do the best that we can with our own self and our own psyche, then we become more capable of having a positive impact on the world around us. It's like when you go on an airplane, you're told to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and then you can help others. It's very much like that. So the Hawkins quote to me is the most succinct way of thinking about how can I be a service vessel? Our contribution to the world is the perfection of our own self.
Oh, sorry, Paul, do you want to take this one?
All right. Indeed. It's hard for me to pinpoint a favorite quote, but I will share a quote that might have actually saved my life at one point, and that is Buckminster Fuller once said that you don't fight the existing reality, you create a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And when I was in my rock bottom phase immediately out of high school, I heard that quote, and it was the first time that it occurred to me that I didn't have to muscle my way through everything or directly fight everything wrong in the world. I needed to instead perceive the model that generates what's going on and then articulate a higher model. And then so from that moment forward, my whole pursuit basically became, how do we discern better models by which to understand things and live? So yeah, you know, that quote, I mean, that got me unstuck when I heard that quote. And so I'm gonna make that my favorite one right now.
John?
You know, I can't pinpoint a specific quote, but I'll tell you this. You know, the last lockdowns obviously were not easy for anybody. But for me, what was particularly overwhelming was not just, you know, having to go against this entire agenda, not just in terms of what I'm writing, but you know, I was fairly vocal at the colleges, and you know, so it was a constant sort of state of anxiety. And in the meantime, the dog's going fuck wild. Hush. And I kept having to be retrained, and so you know, I had to take a series of these trainings, and they were taking classes from me. Everything was ad hoc, and it just, nothing was certain. You know, my employment wasn't certain. You know, I'm doing all this labor that I'm not getting paid for, just to turn out that I have to do it again, and I still don't have a class, and I'm still not making, you know, not that it was ever a lot of money, but not making what, you know, what gets me by. And a lot of people died. I had an uncle, a cousin, and a dear friend all died within weeks of each other. And Charlotte died not too long after that. And I got really just kind of like the wind started to come out of my sails. I felt it because everything had sort of, you know, messed up with my training. So everything I've been sort of talking about in terms of like being in that spiritual, that state, that mentality in which, right, like I'm basically going the distance, whether I like it or not. And so it's gonna sound kind of cheesy probably, but I started listening to, and I do it pretty regularly now. It's David Goggins. If y'all don't know who he was a Navy SEAL guy. He was like an ultra marathon runner, and he's got a lot of very colorful, you know, a little short sort of motivational speeches. I couldn't quote any one of them verbatim. Lots of cuss words in them, so you know, I try not to cuss too much. So I won't try to hazard one. But the crux of most of them is this, right? That it's, you find out who you are when you're push beyond the limits of your talents and your skills and your knowledge. And it took me a long time to figure out how to carry my own weight in life, how to be responsible, how to be disciplined, how to again do the things I didn't want to do to be successful in studying and academia and martial arts and everything. And when lockdowns happened, all the systems that I had in place, everything that worked for me was just like, and it was not a fun place to be, because it's one thing to be in that place when you haven't come up with any solutions. It's another thing to be in that place when all the solutions you came up with don't work. And it was at that point that I started listening to a lot of Goggins stuff, because it was like, I needed that. And I started getting back into running, just doing it just for the sake of, you find out who you are when you push yourself beyond the limits of what you think is capable. And that's the crux of most of his quotes, if I were to pull one up for you.
Matt?
Okay, well, gentlemen, I do want to say, outside of the time here, we're going to take a couple more questions from Luke, and in respect to your time, I'm trying to keep this around the 2-hour mark. So 16 and 17 will be the final questions. And I just want to thank you guys again for coming on. But what is my favorite quote and why? There's one in particular. I've got, like all of you, hundreds and hundreds that I could name, but this one in particular, from Walter and Leo Russell's home study course: there is no such thing in nature as evil, sin, or shame. Nature is never unbalanced. And again, I turn back to the book by Dr. Richard Morris Buck called Cosmic Consciousness. He says one of the conspicuous things in the experience of cosmic consciousness is the utter absence of evil in the experience of the mass of the divine universe. And what does this really mean? But you could boil this down to a Jungian perspective, that evil itself is perhaps an archetype, part of the collective unconscious, that we can experience the memories and the past experiences of humanity as a collective gone by that can insert itself into the thinking of human beings. But the question of evil coming down to, is it a force all of its own? I would have to say myself, the reason why I like that quote so much is that the answer would be no, that mankind himself is the progenitor of evil. So that means if we create it, we can uncreate it. That power is within us. And that's really what the heart of my work goes to, is that mind being causal in this sense that we have to make the decision before we act in most cases. You look at the creator's thinking and we call that nature. That's God's product of God's mind. And we look at the products of man's mind and we call those things man-made items and things. There's trillions of examples I can enter into Exhibit A if it pleases the court. But all these thoughts, if they're balanced, there's no evil residue left over. So again, it's a very difficult thing to place the onus of responsibility solely on man's shoulders. But I don't think until we can begin arresting interdimensional entities and putting them on trial that we're going to get any further to eradicating this problem of evil that's in our world. So we have to hold ourselves responsible. There are real human beings that can be arrested. We don't have to slip into different dimensions and try to put handcuffs on a gaseous entity that has no existence in our perceptual world, but we can put a Nuremberg on, or things of this nature that can actually do some justice, to the world for the crimes that have been committed against its populace. And so to me, that's just a very incredible statement. But in nature, and many philosophers and others will agree that there's no evil in it. It operates perfectly on balanced principles. So I would just like to see us do the same in our world.
What, in your opinion, would be the greatest solutions to apply? Paul?
There we go. Not muted anymore. Okay. The greatest solutions to apply. it slips my mind who said this, but the answer was given in a previous answer by somebody here, I forget. But yeah, it's to perfect yourself. It's at the end of the day, as I said before, there's really no such thing as secondhand knowledge. You know, this whole concept of trusting experts, it's like, how do you trust an expert unless you possess also the expertise necessary to evaluate the expertise of the other expert? It can't be done. So anybody theoretically could present themselves as an expert and wear the trappings of expertise, wear the lab coat, wear the this and that, you know, hold the props, have the clipboard, look official, this and that. And for all you know, it could all be a giant ruse. As you know, I think some people find that perspective kind of discomforting in the very beginning, but again, there is freedom in thinking for yourself beyond the wildest dreams of people who are asleep. And I know, because I once was asleep, I would have never ever predicted when I was asleep that I would, you know, learn you know, how to hypnotize people, or how to identify, you know, worldwide psyopses, or there's all kinds of stuff I've learned throughout the years that was made possible simply because I had had enough of the old ways of doing things, and I wanted to figure out how things really work, how to achieve my highest potential, as it were. So you know, there's a saying that that the chain is as strong as its weakest link, right? So each one of us has kind of a duty, in a sense, to become our best selves, not just to ourselves, but for the sake of the greater community and, you know, nation and entire world, really, when you get down to it. You know, there are practicalities that I think it would be really good for a lot of people to know how to file effective legal complaints against recalcitrant officials. I think that would be an absolutely wonderful thing. There's a course on that called Jurisdictionary, and I currently don't get paid to say that. Look it up, Jurisdictionary. It takes maybe a weekends to learn it. It'll help you learn how to formulate arguments in a legal context. And I think that is necessary. We have to perfect ourselves, but then we also have to create a unified front with lots of us together, just really hammering these guys like, you are breaking the law, you are breaking morality, you are breaking, you know, you are not adhering to science, you are not adhering to any ethical framework that can be justified. So yeah, perfect yourself, link up with others, start learning how to heal what's going on in your life, see if you can help others in the, you know, in like manner, and then together go and start filing some, you know, because a lot of these guys, they're not following their rule book because nobody ever holds them to account. There's a man, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but something along the lines of Alfonso Fagioli, I think. I'm going to be posting about his work on my Substack in the future, so don't worry if you can't remember it. If you follow my work, I'll be posting about him again soon. But he's got judges afraid of him, and he's not like doing esoteric sovereign citizen kind of stuff. There is a whole can of worms when it comes to the legal name, when it comes to what's going on in trust law, when it comes to a corporate government and this and that, and you can get really lost in, you know, in the weeds. But at the end of the day, as far-fetched as it seems in the current environment, fact of the matter is that you do actually have rights, and you can use those rights. That's what it comes down to. So that's my very long-winded answer to that question. And so I'll hand the floor back to y'all.
John, you want to take this?
Broadly speaking, I would just say civil disobedience, which is as an extension of your own obedience to your own conscience, which is to basically do what is right for the sake of it being right, not for the sake of some sort of outcome that you're going to get. You know, using this civil disobedience as sort of the vehicle to create parallel structures, you know, rather than try to reform institutions or beg for some sort of respite from, you know, from corporations or governments, simply to just not comply and find a way to create an alternative that doesn't fall under the purview of either the corporate or the government entities that are foisting all this upon us. And you know, I think it's important to note that in the process of that sort of civil disobedience as an extension of your own conscience, that, you know, if you sort of have to deal with the desire to perhaps take the easier route, except that what you have to understand is that, right, you can't, you know, I think it's a cliched phrase, but I'm not sure who stated it, but it's right. You can't comply your way out of tyranny, right? And you can't wrest your way out of the work that needs to be done, right? The compliance only makes things worse, and your disengagement from the scariness and the risks that are involved in the civil disobedience only makes you softer, only makes you less inclined, less able to muster the inner strength to basically suffer the consequences. Because in that process, right, that civil disobedience, like for a lot of people, I was lucky enough I was able to keep my job, although it basically got totally upended, restructured, and put online. So you can in one way say I have a totally new job, the same institution. But a lot of, you know, I mean, every day I was just waiting for, you know, that to be the end, and for me to have to go swing a hammer or you know, throw trees in the chipper or whatever I had to do. So, you know, you just have to be willing to, you know, suffer the consequences, figure it out as you go. You don't need to know what the exact solution is. You know, the first thing is don't comply, find like-minded people. And in that process, you all will come up with the parallel structures that you need, as long as you can keep your spiritual fortitude about you.
Mark?
I think the solution, broadly speaking, is to align with the truth. And the flip side of that is overcoming ignorance, because once the truth is known, then one will know how to act, generally speaking. But we live in a world in which the truth seems to be obscured. And Matt made some very good points about the nature of duality and what is nature itself. I mean, I agree with Matt that at the highest level of reality, we hear this from all kinds of spiritually transformative experiences, whether it's a near-death state, psychedelics, meditation, you name it. People talk about a field that seems to be unified and interconnected. And they say that it's made of unconditional love. That's the nature of reality itself. That's not just a feel-good thing. And people say, look, I can't really explain it with words, but that's what I experienced. But we live in a realm of duality in which that interconnectedness is obstructed. And there are variations on that. When it becomes significantly obstructed, we would call that evil, and it can be intense and it can create great suffering. So part of overcoming ignorance is to be able to see through the duality and then act accordingly. And I'm not going to give specifics in terms of how to act, because I think for each person it differs. I like to think of reality as a cosmic puzzle, and each of us is a unique piece within the puzzle, meaning we have distinct skills and ways of being able to contribute. So once we tap into the truth and perfect ourselves and become the best vessel we can be, I think we are then guided toward the best way that we can contribute.
Matt?
Wonderfully said, Mark. Guys, I couldn't agree more. Consciousness, right? It's, if you're conscious and you're aware that you're in this world, despite its nefarious sides, despite its even good sides, just being conscious is such an important thing. And the more you can bring, at least through your respective work, through your respective self, and it's really a self-respect that generates, you have to have that inward self-respect in order to generate any kind of respect from the outside. And that's really what authenticity is. It's being real with yourself. And I think our consciousness plays a huge role in that. And that for me is why I started the exploration of consciousness, it's one man exploring the world with his own unique consciousness. And I've met some really incredible conscious people in this exploration. You guys all here today are part of that exploration. And I just want to thank you again very much. I know we got one question left, but for your time, for coming on, and for the great work that you each done respectively and respectfully, because it's very much needed at this stage in the game. And we all do bring a little piece of that puzzle to the table, Mark and John and Paul and Luke. And my Lori told me not to forget to say that on this particular podcast, we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Paul. And she happened to notice that after I scheduled it. So just a little biblical reference there, but I think that's pretty cool. But thanks, guys.
If the truth movement is successful and humanity is saved from the New World Order, what can we do to protect future generations from this manifestation returning? John?
I'm a big advocate of being a student of history, and it's implicit in also the approach that I recommend in my book. As far as so I mentioned that Trivium methodology, rooted in metaphysics in terms of the philosophy to undergird the methodology. But then also part of that methodology requires what's known as the historical grammatical approach. So it's to understand the use of words in their historical context, basically dovetailed with something that was once called philology, doesn't exist anymore. It basically transmuted it into modern linguistics, and I won't digress into all of that. But the idea here is that not just that you can understand in order to understand the ideas, the concepts, the philosophies that drive the society that we currently live in, we have to understand sort of how we got here, how those ideas sort of evolved over time, how they were responses to previous ideas and previous paradigms, and previous historical events, economic, political, and otherwise. So in fact, it was studying history that even got me to sort of go down the rabbit hole, so to speak, and that was learning about these really horrendous events in history that somehow got left out of all the textbooks that I read all the way through much of undergrad, right? I mean, I've often told the story that I wasn't very it's kind of embarrassing that I didn't learn about what eugenics was until almost my senior year of undergrad, right? And I learned that, not only was that Hitler's race science, but apparently, all of our American robber barons were funding it, or certainly the Rockefeller Foundation, and there's other corporate ties, academic ties as well. I remember looking at the history of the Black Panther Party and seeing how I was lied to about the nature of that organization, right? They sort of framed them. I always read about them in school as like the Black KKK or something, which was not at all, right? They were, somebody like Fred Hampton, was collaborated with the Young Lords and Young Patriots, right? So, all different ethnicities. So I think that if you can help people be aware of the history, then history sort of the cliche is that it repeats itself. So I would say that in line with sort of the solutions I provide in my book, that a historical grammatical curriculum under the Trivium method, hopefully if we keep the history of what happened up to the new era, so to speak, that we can recognize it if and when it tries to pop its head back up.
Mark?
Generally speaking, education, along the lines of what John said. The younger generations need to be educated with diverse ways of thinking, diverse sources of information, and be taught critical thinking. But what I would be concerned about is how is that information preserved? And one way of doing it is through physical preservation, writing things down and having them available in places where people can see them, like in libraries, but also possibly hiding knowledge. And we've seen archaeological excavations like the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi scriptures, which were found in 1945 from many hundreds of years before. So there probably would need to be some way of preserving the information where it could be hidden enough, but also known about, where it could be accessed if needed. And then with modern technology, we do have the advantage of digitized information. I think there is risk with that because maybe it can be wiped out in ways that physical information can't be, but just whatever we can do to diversify our actual sources of being able to get information will be critical.
Paul?
Yeah, broadly speaking, having a historical record that's well preserved, that people are able to review, and I like what John said according to the trivium method. So in addition to those things, because I'm 100% on board with all of those, all that's been said already on this question, I would add to all of that that if we want to preserve a better world on the other side of this conflict, we need to learn, excuse me, once again, we need to learn about relationships, in my opinion, how to form them, how to make them work, how to make them last. Part of I think the breakdown in society that we're seeing, I don't have enough time to get really too deep into it, but men and women are having a very, very tough time pairing up with each other and making it last. And consequently, you have a proliferation of just a lot of more strange, difficult kind of domestic situations. And I understand that, things happen. I don't want anybody to think I'm coming from a judgmental place at all. I just think that there's a certain art to being in a relationship in a really sustainable way where everybody involved gets to see themselves turn into their highest potential. And that is something that we absolutely need to rediscover. So because I think that the stability of society, the stability of all of our knowledge systems, our education is all a byproduct on the relationships we have. So sustainable, healthy, romantic relationships, very, very important. But in addition to that, just relationships in general. We need to learn how to take other people's perspectives, learn how to be a bit more diplomatic, in general. And in particular, it's very important for us to understand what the real emotional needs of children and infants and babies are, because a lot of this mind control that you see is rooted in visiting certain traumas upon people in childhood. And so knowing how to parents to the best of our ability is going to play an absolute key factor in keeping any peace that we may establish on the other side of this conflict.
Matt?
Well, I would say you guys all have an example of one of the things that can keep and protect future generations from this kind of a manifestation from occurring again in your own screenshots there. You've got books, each of you, and I'm the only one, I'm the oddball out here. All my books are inside on the shelves, but I think, having physical copies of things, especially knowledge, in a digitized world where, for all we know, at some point there could be manipulations, if there haven't already been, in the digitization of some of these great works and these great minds whose shoulders we stand on. And so protecting them with physical copies in the real world. You guys, Mark and John, have both created your works of writing, which are incredible. I love meeting authors because it's something I have not been able to do myself, is write a book. And I know it's a challenge, but I'm looking forward to it, and I just have to be ready. But you guys are inspiring, and I think inspiration is one of the ways, as you said, Mark, we can utilize to get young people to take a look at this information. Because if you think to your days in school, who are your favorite teachers? If you could only name two, chances are you would name those who inspired you more than the others did. That's the ones I remember, Mr. Roy and Mr. Vellis. They were such inspirations. And they always told me, that I could do whatever I put my mind to. But the way that they presented information, it made it fun. It inspired me. So those are the ones I remember, and if we can do the same for the younger generations, inspire them, especially when it comes, as John said, knowing your history, as Paul said, various answers about, unplugging and undoing the trauma and all these mental programs that we're, bombarded with from childhood. Some of the best ways that I think that can be done is to inspire people, not just the younger generations, but older as well. And you're putting your heart and soul into something. You put it into your writing, you put it into your videos, you put it into your music, you put it into the way you talk. That's really going to grab their attention and hold it, and it's going to transfer much better. And then as far as keeping it from returning, you just have to not let myth become legend, as in Lord of the Rings. It's history becomes myth and it becomes legend, and then it's not believed after 3,000 or 4,000 years. So we just have to find a way to keep it at the front, keep it at the center, and hopefully together we're all doing our part in little ways. We can certainly work to lift humanity up a notch higher on our journeys, respectively.
And now we're just going to do closing thoughts and links and contacts and websites and all that. Mark, do you want to start?
Sure. My closing thought is, first of all, Matt, thank you so much for arranging this, and thank you to the other panelists and Luke for asking such good questions. I think conversations like this and being exposed to information and different ways of thinking is so critical to our way and our path forward. So I would encourage anyone listening to hopefully continue to think about the ideas that we talked about here and from other sources, and not just put it as something on the side, because I think we talked about today as these issues are fundamental to our existence and our future as a society. And it's easy when caught up in daily living to say, well, I have my job and family, and I'm going to think about this other stuff secondarily. To me, they're all intertwined. And that's been a practice for me to try to put this stuff as front and center as everything else in my life. In terms of being able to find me, my website is just my name, markgober.com, markgober.com. I have 5 books that are on Amazon. They all start with an end to upside down, and end upside down thinking, living, liberty, contact, and reset. They are available in hard copy, Audible, and Kindle. And my podcast series on the nature of consciousness, it's called Where Is My Mind? And that is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other major players.
Paul?
There we go. Mouse disappeared on me for a second. Look, we've been talking about solutions this whole cast, and what you guys are seeing is an example of a solution. It's like we need to learn the truth as much as we possibly can, get together, talk about it, and reap the benefits of our collective intelligence therefrom. And I really, really appreciate greatly. Matt's fantastic. It's been great talking to all of you guys. I hope everybody listening checks out everybody's work here. because this is a group of people that's been spending a long time analyzing what's going on, figuring out solutions. So there's just a massive wealth of information here to be gotten from, So in my case, if you want to find my work, it's americanhypnotist.substack.com. That's currently what I have available for the world to see. I also write sometimes for Badlands Media. I talk a little bit more about 5G war, law, various types of potential conspiracies, sometimes very Q-centric for anybody who's into that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm going to be at some point in the future looking to expand what I'm doing with the American Hypnotist Substack to creating a more website that I create. Hope to eventually have a hypnosis school where people can learn experientially rather than just reading about it. So americanhypnotist.substack.com, badlands.substack.com, and stay tuned because more stuff's coming out on both of those channels. And thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate everybody taking the time today to be here.
John?
Brought Jasper Dog to do my closing statement. Sorry, this is the guy who's go on, get out of here. He kept scratching at the door, so I brought him in. I would say so. My final thoughts are, I think I covered a range of stuff, from philosophy, theology, metaphysics, trivium, the willpower, faith, conscience, all this heavy stuff about sort of how to navigate through this world, how to reach your full potential, how to do the right thing, how to align your existence with the transcendent nature of God and the universe. One thing I didn't touch on that I think is perhaps the core, or maybe more important than all of it, certainly is essential, and that is grace. And that means grace, not just for others, but for yourself. So in order for us to get through this, it's not just enough for each of us to sort of find our own individual way, but for us to try to help people along the path, or, help them get on the path perhaps, and then help them along the way, and to know that you're not going to get it right immediately. They're not going to get it right immediately. As long as nobody's trying to force you to do something, or is an active enemy combatant in some way, you should always find a way to, be tolerant, give grace, be patient, be loving, and that goes for yourself as well. And I think that is the most powerful tool for turning this boat around. I think that the life of Jesus Christ and Gandhi and King shows us that Dr. Martin Luther King, that is, shows us that it's the peaceful method of civil disobedience, which is in many ways much more powerful, perhaps more for lack of a better term, revolutionary than any sort of oppositional mode of resistance. So that's what I would end with, is that, just as you work your way through all this, be very gracious with your grace to yourself and to others. And so if you want to, follow up on my research, you can go to schoolworldorder.info. You can get my book there, links to all my articles, social media on that website as well.
Matt?
Well, gentlemen, I'm not going to expound upon my own work. My audience is quite familiar with my mess of a collection of stuff, but I do want to thank you all again for, taking the time out of your day to come on. And this is my first panel, the first conscious panel, episode 11. And I just want to say that hopefully we'll have more down the road. Maybe every 10 shows, I'd like to do a panel of sorts just to recap on the previous ones, but some of these are really great. And I would say all the links will be below this video for each of your respective work. So go check out John Klyczek's work, Paul Conant's work, Mark Gober's work. And I also want to say a special thanks to my good friend Luke Renda for taking time out of his day. He's got a podcast going as well, so maybe you guys can hook up, have a chat down the road. But thanks again, Luke, for coming on, doing the fine job of moderating. This will be up and available in the next 24 to 48 hours or so. A little bit of minor editing to do. And then I hope that you guys will receive lots of orders for your work and more interest, and buy some books, folks, because that helps these guys out to keep on the path for putting this great stuff out. And all of this is a group effort. We do this as individuals. And really just my closing thought on everything, and this is not from Alex Jones, by the way, it's from a British author speaker. The answer to 1984 is 1776. And anyways, we really appreciate all of you and look forward to seeing you down the road. Check out these guys' work. All the links will be below this podcast in the more information section. So with that, I appreciate you guys. Have a fine day, and we'll talk again soon.
Take care, everybody. Great talk.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for viewing and for sharing the link to this tech podcast. To find out more about the work that I do, you can visit mattpresti.com. Scroll down to the bottom to view all of my social media links and channels. If you feel so inclined, you may leave a donation through the Cash App by scanning the QR code or using the hashtag $MPRESTI. To contact me, simply reach out through the contact form at mattpresti.com. Thank you so much.